All right, so today we're really diving deep into building those long-term savings. Actually making it happen, not just like dreaming about it. We're tackling 5 effective budgeting techniques for long-term savings. But don't worry, this isn't about becoming a financial guru overnight.
Exactly. And what I find really interesting about this article is how it brings together those practical money tips, but with, get this, the psychology of savings. Like, how do we set ourselves up for success, not just with our bank accounts, but also, mentally?
Okay, now that's intriguing. Can you give me an example? How does that actually play out?
Well, instead of that whole, like, spend less, save more thing, which we've all heard a million times, right? This article talks about, like, reframing saving, thinking about it as like a gift to your future self, that takeout you're craving. Choosing to cook at home instead and saving that 20, 30 bucks, that's not deprivation. That's self-care, right? Because you're looking out for your future financial well-being.
I love that. It makes saving feel like, well, empowering, not a punishment.
Right. It's not about can't have. It's more like, I'm choosing this. And that actually ties into the article's first big point, setting clear savings goals.
Mm.
But it emphasizes, like, really breaking those goals down. We're talking bite-sized, achievable steps.
So instead of this huge, daunting goal like buy a house, it's save for the down payment. Is that kind of what you mean?
You got it. It's about building momentum. Each like mini win you rack up that just fuels your motivation, making you way more likely to, stick with it for the long haul. Imagine actually hitting that down payment goal, though. Talk about a confidence boost.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. But how does this whole psychology thing play into like the dreaded tracking expenses part? Because honestly, that sounds about as fun as, I don't know, getting your teeth cleaned.
I hear you. It sounds kind of like a drag.
Mhm.
But think of it this way. Have you ever gotten to the end of the month and been totally surprised by how much you spent on, say, takeout? Like, whoa, 200 bucks on burritos. Where'd that go? That's where tracking your expenses is really key.
It's more about like awareness than just being cheap.
Exactly. It's not about judgment at all. It's just like getting the information. The article actually highlights this, how like people are often genuinely shocked to realize where their money's actually going.
It's those small little purchases that you don't even think about at the time, right? But they can really add up.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah.
And this is where those budgeting apps, they can really come in handy. They basically do all that tedious work for you.
Right. You mentioned Mint and Wina earlier. What are those all about?
Okay, so Mint, that's like your all-in-one financial dashboard. It connects to your bank accounts, credit cards, tracks all your spending automatically, and even helps you set those financial goals we were talking about.
Sounds pretty comprehensive. What about YNAB?
So YNAB, it stands for You Need a Budget,
Yeah.
and it's known for being, well, a little different. It's all about this idea of giving every single dollar a job.
Every dollar a job. Okay. Interesting.
So let's say you go a little overboard in one category, like maybe you spend a bit too much on clothes. Well, with YNRB, you have to consciously take that money from another category. So maybe you cut back on eating out that month to make up for it.
So it's less about like tracking after the fact and more about like active planning, right? Thinking about where you want your money to go before you actually spend it.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you
Yeah.
said, being proactive with your money, really making those choices on purpose. And you know what? That actually leads perfectly into the next big thing the article talks about, which is creating a realistic budget.
And I'm guessing that the word realistic is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that phrase.
For sure. Because we've all tried those super restrictive budgets, right?
Mm.
The ones where it's like, okay, I'm cutting out everything fun,
Right.
but that never lasts.
Nope. Definitely not sustainable.
It's just not. This article, though, it really gets that. It's not about like totally depriving yourself. It's about making conscious choices about your spending, really thinking about it. And they emphasize like needs over wants.
Which, again, sounds simple enough on the surface, but I bet that's where a lot of people, they kind of get tripped up. So how does the article actually recommend, like, approaching that whole needs versus wants thing?
Well, they have this really great analogy. They talk about picturing your income like a pie, right?
Yeah.
And you've got to slice up that pie to cover all your essential expenses first.
Yeah.
So we're talking housing, food, transportation, all those things that are like non-negotiable.
Right? Got to keep the lights on.
Exactly. But then it gets interesting because they encourage you to actually get really granular with the rest of your spending.
So, like, instead of having this big chunk of the pie that's just labeled, like, fun money, you break it down even further.
Exactly. So maybe you're super into going to concerts,
Yeah.
right? Like that's your thing. but you're okay with like maybe cutting back on eating out so you could afford those concert tickets. It's all
Right.
about figuring out what you value most and then making sure your budget actually reflects that.
It's about aligning your spending with your values. And that's something we can actually control, right? Like, yeah, maybe our income isn't always what we want it to be, but we can control how we spend the money we do have.
100%.
Mm.
And I bet this is where those budgeting apps, especially that YNAB one we talked about, can be super helpful.
Hmm.
Being able to actually see where all those slices of the pie are going in real time.
Totally. Getting that immediate feedback can be a game changer for sure.
Right. Like no more nasty surprises at the end of the month.
Yeah.
And speaking of things that can be real game changers, the article also dives into this idea of automating your savings, which is something I am a huge fan of.
Oh, tell me about it. Automation has changed my life, seriously.
Right. Like, let's be real. If we're relying solely on our own willpower to, like, remember to transfer money to savings every single month, it's probably not going to happen, or at least not consistently.
Oh, I'm the queen of good intentions, but yeah, following through, not so much.
Exactly. And that's why automation is key. Remember we talked about that whole paying yourself first concept earlier? Well, this is how you actually make it happen. Like, set it and forget it.
Right, so you're basically tricking yourself into building good financial habits without even having to think about it.
Exactly. Set up an automatic transfer for like right after payday, and boom, you're automatically saving consistently without even having to lift a finger.
Okay, that's brilliant. I love it. But even with like the best budgeting systems in place, life happens, right? Things change, which is probably why this article is so big on making sure you review and adjust your budget regularly.
Oh, 100%. Like, think of your budget as a living, breathing thing. It's not something you just like set once and then forget about
Whoa.
because your life changes. Your income might change. Your goals might change.
Your priorities change too.
Yes, exactly. So regularly reviewing your budget, the article recommends doing it like at least quarterly,
Hmm.
really allows you to adapt your plan and make sure you're still on track to reach your goals.
It's like a checkup, but for your money. And speaking of checkups, the article also gets into some like common budgeting mistakes, stuff I bet we're all guilty of at some point.
Oh, for sure. And, one of the biggest ones, it's like that tendency to underestimate those irregular expenses.
What was that again? Costs?
Exactly. It's those random things that pop up out of nowhere, like car repairs, medical bills, or even like holiday gifts. It's easy to budget for the regular stuff, the rent, groceries, but those curveballs, those can really throw a wrench in your savings plans if you're not ready for them.
It's like the financial version of forgetting your umbrella when it's pouring rain. You know it could happen, but
But you don't always plan for it. And then another mistake I see a lot, sadly, is people, they just neglect savings
yeah.
completely. It's tempting, especially when you're younger or just starting out, to be like, I'll worry about that later. But that whole compound interest thing, it's serious business.
The sooner you plant that money tree, the bigger it grows, right?
Exactly. The best time to start saving was yesterday. The second best time is today. And, this kind of ties back to what we were talking about earlier with tracking your spending.
Hmm.
Because it's not enough to just like make a budget in your head and hope for the best.
Right. It's got to be written down somewhere.
It does. And you got to actually look at it too, like monitor your progress, see where your money's going, and then be willing to adjust things as needed.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it's like you're just wandering around in the dark, hoping you'll stumble across your financial goals.
Hoping for the best, but not really having a plan.
Exactly.
So, to kind of bring it all together, I feel like we've covered a ton of really great stuff today. We talked about setting those realistic goals, understanding where our money's going, making the most of those budgeting apps, and what was it? Automating our savings.
Yes. Setting it and forgetting it.
Right, which I love. But also, we talked about something super important, how we think about all of this. Like, budgeting doesn't have to be this terrible restrictive thing. It's really about making choices that line up with our values and what we actually want out of life.
It's about being in control,
Yeah.
having your money work for you, not the other way around. And that's empowering.
Totally. Whether it's buying that house, traveling the world, or, retiring early, whatever your jam is.
Exactly. It's about giving yourself the best possible chance to achieve those dreams.
Now, one thing we didn't really touch on today and something maybe to think about is how to handle those, like, unexpected windfalls. If you suddenly get a bonus or, I don't know, win the lottery, hopefully,
Yeah.
what do you do then? Something to ponder as you continue on your budgeting journey.